The views and opinions shared on Taken Too Soon are those of the guest and don't necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the host and contributors. This podcast discusses mature themes and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
In February 2014, Holly Strickland went missing. Days later, her body was found off a rural road on the backside of where she lived. For days, there were no answers. Law enforcement said they didn't suspect foul play. Then the autopsy came in, and everything changed.
This is Taken Too Soon, and in today's episode, we are joined once again by Dr. Jon Hager, a University of North Georgia forensic science professor and former crime scene investigator, to help us understand what the autopsy report really tells us and what it doesn't.
So we're in the studio today, and we're talking with UNG professor Dr. Jon Hager. Jon, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you.
So you came on last season to talk about the Elaine Nix case and the autopsy. And this season, we've also asked you to do the same and look at the autopsy for Holly. Were there any big things that stood out to you when you were going over it?
One of the key things that came up was there was the indeterminate muzzle to target distance.
Indeterminate. It's a word you'll hear a lot when the evidence doesn't paint a full picture.
Especially when dealing with gunshot wounds. Dr. Hager explains what that actually means in forensic terms.
Meaning that they didn't know the distance between the end of the barrel and the actual target.
Gotcha. And so when you're looking at previous cases that you've had and you look at this case, what does that mean in terms of trying to determine how far someone was away from Holly when they shot?
Well, depending on what you read, there's different muzzle to target distance. There's contact, you have close-up, you have intermediate, and you have distant. At each one of those distances will disperse different amounts of gunshot residue. And also, another variable to throw into it too is the size of the gun and the size of the ammunition. So the more ammunition, more gunpowder, the more gunshot residue that's dispersed. Another thing to consider is the length of the barrel. If you have, say you have a revolver, a snub nose barrel, there's a short barrel compared to a longer gun, the shorter barrel will disperse it faster and wider than one with a long barrel. Another thing to consider too, when you have a distant gunshot wound, there's a chance where there's no gunshot residue. Well, actually, in a distant gunshot wound, there would only be the bullet hole. No gunshot residue because based on physics, the gunshot residue can't travel that far. And we're talking about a distant gunshot wound, we're talking over 18 inches away from muzzle to target. Greater than 18 inches is considered distant. So now, if a pathologist looked at a gunshot wound and saw no gunshot residue or soot around the wound, nothing, it was just a bullet hole, the assumption cannot be made that it's a distant gunshot wound. Because of the variables that could be involved, meaning that let's say someone had a firearm and they put a silencer on it. The person could be closer than 18 inches, but the silencer prevented the disbursement of the gunshot residue pattern around the wound. It could be that when a person was being shot, someone shot through a pillow, preventing the gunshot residue from being dispersed, or some type of other intermediate object, such as a window, a car door, that will prevent disbursement. So when you see a bullet hole and you know and the circumstances aren't totally clear, you have to rule it as indeterminate because there's that option that variable exists that something prevented the disbursement of that. Unless you have CCTV and say, hey, this person was 50 yards away when they shot the person. Yeah, we can rule that as distant. So just because there's nothing around the wound and the lack of clarity of the circumstances, they'd rule as indeterminate. Now, if you look back at, also in the autopsy report, talk about stippling. Now, stippling, another word used interchangeable is called tattooing. And sometimes you'll see on television that they'll explain stippling or tattooing as gunpowder burning the skin. It never burns the skin. And what it is unburned gunpowder exits the muzzle and abrades the skin. And it creates, it's something where if you see a gunshot wound when there's smoke around the wound or soot, that you can wipe away. Stippling you cannot because the unburned gunpowder actually abrades the skin and gets embedded in the skin and becomes an injury. And that's visible to a pathologist if it's present. Now, stippling or tattooing will occur from 18 inches and closer muzzle to target. So 18 inches is kind of the key the key distance. But remember that 18 inches is simply for a handgun with no modifications. Now we go to rifles and shotguns and all that stuff. That's then we're talking about something different.
And same as when you were talking about there being like a pillow or some other object in between. If something like that is interfering with the gun and the muzzle, then we would also might not see that stippling.
Correct.
Okay. Also, there was mention of it being at a downward angle. From cases that you've worked where it might have been a suicide or a homicide or anything like that, what does the downward trajectory point to you as for the cause?
Well, a downward angle is more likely to be a homicidal event versus a suicidal would be more of an upward angle. So that's a good differentiating. When I'm talking angles, though, I mean, it's a small angle, but it can be determined during an autopsy.
And then can you kind of explain the actual wound, the actual gunshot?
Well, she was shot beneath the right eye, I believe, right? And then it fragmented. When it fragments, and when they do a radiograph or x-ray of it, it fragments, and it's something called a snowstorm. And so if you look at all the different fragments in the radiograph, and they try to retrieve all those different fragments from the projectile and then trying to figure out, is it viable for doing a comparison or not? But this one's pretty well fragmented, so the only thing they could really say was that it was a small caliber. But it did talk about how it was at a downward angle, which would suspect that, if the person was shooting from the road, it makes sense that it would be going downward into her face. And no stippling or tattooing, too, because of the distance.
Holly was shot just below the right eye. The bullet fragmented inside her skull, creating what Hager described as a snowstorm of metal on the x-ray.
That kind of fragmentation suggests a small caliber round, but it also made ballistics analysis difficult.
And before you came to UNG, you actually worked on a show called The First 48. Is that right?
Yeah, I was in a few episodes.
Gotcha. And what is the significance of The First 48? Walk us through that idea.
Well, the key for all scenes is that when the first responding officer determines that a crime's been committed, that it's secured and everybody's out of the scene. The whole importance of securing is that the scene is to make it in its most pristine conditions. As time passes, it could be not even 48 hours. It could be after 5 hours. The scene's already deteriorating. It could be for a variety of things. Let's say it's a decedent. Their body's going to go through changes while you're at the scene. It could be rainy. It could be windy. Also, another important thing as far as interviewing people. Things are going to change after 48 hours and what they actually maybe saw or heard. And if you interview them a week later, that their answers to those questions might be different a week later and also you have the emotional part of it too. So you want to get as much information within the 48 hours because that's the most pristine and it's the most it's the time when the scene is most fresh to everybody. After 48 hours, everything's times that kind of get gray and blurry because it's not fresh in everybody's mind like it would be within the first 48.
So the case that we've got here that we've asked you to look at, Holly's case, goes missing, is found 4 to 5 days later. What kind of deterioration or potential crime scene contamination would you think might happen in that case, especially with reports that there had been some heavy rain and just stormy weather during that time period?
Automatically, there's going to be contaminations to almost all scenes because you're going to have, let's say, for the instance of this case, family members coming to the scene. That's contamination. Not clearing a scene be contamination of the scene. You could have the first responding officer contaminating the scene. Now, most of this contamination is not purposeful. It can be done innocently. It could be something as easy as someone finding a body and rolling it over to see if they're alive. That's contaminating the scene because it's not in its pristine condition. So there's a variety of ways. Oh, actually, one thing that stood out as far as contamination, and you may not think this of contamination, but they can take away evidence, is the predatory activity in the body. Insects and rats, whatever it might be, they could take away evidence as well. And they also disguise the actual wound on the face too, because they're going to naturally go to an open wound. They'll lay their eggs bullflies lay eggs in their open wounds. So that's a contaminant you wouldn't really think of, but that's a contaminating because they can take away DNA just by them consuming the body. But the weather. And also, I don't know, of course, I don't know what the temperature was at the time, but 4 or 5 days, there's some good stages of decomposition going on in 4 to 5 days.
And did that line up with what you saw in the autopsy report? The deterioration, did that seem to line up with the 4 to 5 days being out in the elements?
Yeah, it was accurate. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've heard Holly's body was partially concealed, possibly with a trash bag and something laid on top.
We weren't able to corroborate this information before speaking with Dr. Hager, but we were able to verify it in a later interview that you'll hear next week.
If a body is concealed in some way, say something put on top of it and then something put on top of that as a way to hide the body, would that slow down the deterioration process? Would that impact how the body would be when it was found, just based on it being extra covered?
When you're looking at concealment, the type of concealment, it really depends on how much it will impact it. It will protect it from the elements such as the rain or wind and stuff like that, but blowflies will still get there. So there'll still be the insect activity. Now, let's say we do a concealment. How about we bury a body? We'll take this example of this case, and then let's say we have a person who is placed in a trunk. That person in the trunk is more concealed and more protected than this case. So person in the trunk will decompose at a slower rate. If you get a buried body, you have cool temperatures underground, that's gonna decompose even slower. So the environmental situation will impact the speed of decomposition.
And would the speed of decomposition also vary dependent on what the body was covered with? Say, between the difference between a cardboard box, which I think would be more prone to be degraded itself by the elements, or say a plastic cover of some sort, like a tarp or a trash bag or something like this.
Yeah, plastic. Yeah, and also, there'll be more protection actually from the elements and insect activity too. If it's a tarp, more a non-porous substance would protect the body more than it would just simple cardboard.
And this might be more of a criminal psychology question than something that you'd be more familiar with. But when there is concealment of the body, does that indicate in more circumstances than not some sort of relationship or some sort of what the perpetrator's connection is to the decedent? When
you do have concealment, it does give you something to think about as far as the preparation possibly to hide a body. It takes more planning, I would say, if you decide to conceal a body and wrap it up in something, or it could be something they just had available to them. I think of all the homicides I've been to, the most violent ones were usually domestic related, whether it be hetero or homosexual. For this one, it'd be hard to say because there's just one gunshot wound. So whether or not it was domestic related or not, it's hard to say, and whether or not the concealment played a role in it. When people try to conceal someone, A, they don't want someone to find it, and B, they may hope it gets to a point of decomposition where you can't recognize who they are. That's another why you conceal someone too.
See, that throws in the whole like cell phone thing. Like someone obviously went down and got her cell phone, either previous to her being shot or after she was shot. And so maybe at that point, when the retrieval of her cell phone, perhaps they concealed the body with, say, a non-porous material and then put something else on top of that. But you don't think that's a logical thing because, one, you're having to get out of your car, shoot from the road, and then walk down to where you just shot, grab the phone, and then cover the body up. That just doesn't...
It doesn't make sense logically, because someone's going to shoot and run unless they're in some secluded field where there's no one around and they're going to shoot them. Yeah, you can take the time to go conceal them, put bushes or whatever you might on top of them. Then you have time, but in a populated area, though, that's pretty risky.
But could that indicate that it was more than one person? Because again, at some point, someone went to her body and got her phone. Which is still missing to this day, right? So,
it could. Yeah, that could mean there's at least two included. Yeah.
So law enforcement did not say anything about the cause of death for more than a year, and originally they said they did not suspect foul play. Is that what you got from reading this? Because obviously they changed their public messaging after the autopsy report and said, we're investigating this as a homicide and anybody come forward that has information. But from reading this, would you have gotten that impression at the scene?
The goal of a forensic pathologist and then just death investigation in general is to be just purely objective. They're not trying to look for anyone, get anybody. They just provide the facts and they present them. And then law enforcement will move based upon what the findings of the pathologist was. So if for some reason the pathologist found out that, hey, this was an accidental death, law enforcement would just stop investigating, period. But once it comes back as a homicide, then they have to do their investigation to figure out who did this. So the autopsy results play a heavy role on actions of what law enforcement need to do afterwards. So essentially, until the autopsy report came out, they really don't know the manner of death legally. So they could really say anything they really wanted because there hasn't been a ruling yet of until the report came out.
And would law enforcement normally withhold, once they found out that it was a homicide, would they normally withhold the fact that she had been shot? Because in the reporting that I've seen, it was initially ruled no foul play suspected. Then it moved to possible homicide. And then it was even way later before it was reported that she had actually been shot. Is that something that they would have just kept close to the vest for investigative purposes?
Well, that's pretty much open records. So hiding the gunshot wound really wouldn't be, I don't know how beneficial that would be by not hiding that, because the general public's going to know this. So yeah, I wouldn't understand why they'd hide that she died from a single gunshot wound. That wouldn't make sense to me. Now I understand if there's certain evidence that isn't known to the public, such as maybe they found some DNA underneath her fingernails that's linked to someone, I could see them not sharing that because it could lead to a possible subject. But as far as the injury itself, I don't know why they would hide that. Or let's for instance, the projectile they used was a very special type of projectile, very rare. I could see them not sharing that information because it may lead back to who the subject is. But just the simple gunshot wound is so general that I don't know why you would not share that.
Still, the local community was left in the dark for days. The official story kept changing.
First, no foul play. Then, possible homicide. Only later did they confirm she'd been shot.
And what are the difficulties when trying to test for DNA of items that might be left at the scene? Can you talk about a little bit about that? A lot of people watch CSI and the crime shows and probably also listen to true crime podcasts, and they think, why haven't they tested for DNA, or why haven't they been able to get any of that? What are the difficulties in obtaining good, credible evidence that can lead to a conviction?
There's this theory called Locard's exchange principle. And it states that whenever two things come in contact, there's a transfer of material, right? The problem with this is it's a great theory for criminal investigations, because as I'm sitting here, there's probably fibers on my clothes that are going to be stuck to this chair. It could be 3 years later, there's a crime committed and this chair is involved, and guess what? My fibers are here. So it doesn't help identify when and how stuff was transferred. And in this case too, with the family members being there and she's living with family, if their DNA was present on her, it really means nothing because they go cohabitate together. Now, if it was something unusual, a DNA profile popped up that wasn't a family member, then that's kind of suspicious. But also, if she's in the elements too, that could also wash away DNA too. If she's in rain, that could, and the predatory activity too, could influence that.
When Holly's mother Wilma was first told that her daughter's body had been found, Angie Baker told Wilma, quote, "They beat her to death," end quote. So we asked Dr. Hager if it could have appeared that way based on Holly's autopsy.
Yeah, it could appear something like that. Give you another example of something similar to that is that when someone dies, there's purge fluid that comes out of their nose and mouth when they're moved. And sometimes when you're examining just someone who died of natural death and you go to check their backside to see, hey, do they have any injuries or anything on the backside? When you flip them over, the purge fluid lands on their pillow comes out and emanates on their pillow. They got red stuff all over the pillow. And sometimes families will think that some foul play happened. And it's probably something very similar to that they're seeing a bunch of blood, they're seeing an injury, and probably unrecognizable because of the insect activity or animal activity. And they probably thought that it was blunt force trauma instead of gunshot wound. Yeah, that would be something. I've seen scenes like that myself where it was, we thought it was blunt force trauma, and it actually was a gunshot wound.
Last season, when we brought you in to look at Elaine's autopsy, there were obviously some things that you felt are missing, or things that you wish you would have if you're an investigator looking at it 20 years or 25 years later to try and get information. Were there any similar elements of this case and just the way that the report was written that, if you're somebody taking a fresh look at it, I wish I had this information about the scene or the environment? Or
Well, I read, before reading about the case, I read the autopsy report, and the autopsy report was thorough. It was thorough to make me almost feel like I was at the scene and looking at the body. So the thoroughness of the autopsy report was much different than the Elaine Nix one.
Was there anything while reading the report that you thought maybe could explain something that maybe someone like Nick or I wouldn't see by looking at that autopsy report that could explain more about what may have transpired?
When you're reconstructing a crime scene, kind of what you're kind of talking about, reconstructing a crime scene, the autopsy report is just one element. There's so many elements there. You have any type of lab analysis, toxicology, you have the scene investigation, witness statements, any interviews they've done. So all these have to be pieced together. So that's why it's important for the initial investigation of law enforcement and the death investigator to provide all this information to the pathologist. Then that pathologist can make a better assessment of what actually happened. So the autopsy report alone wouldn't solve the problem. We do know the whole goal of the pathologist is to determine the cause and manner of death, which they accurately did. Now it's up to law enforcement to figure out who did it. So it's just a very small piece of the puzzle.
And that reconstruction remains incomplete. Holly's murder is still unsolved.
The report gave law enforcement the green light to investigate it as a homicide. But 11 years later, whoever pulled that trigger still hasn't been brought to justice.
Hey, true crime junkies of North Georgia, are you aware of what's going on around you? Find out by signing up for our free newsletters from the Times. You'll get local news in your inbox daily, including at least one free article a day about what's happening in Hall County. And now back to the show.
Time has not lessened the pain of Holly being taken too soon from this world. That is evident when talking to her mother, her sister, and her son.
But Holly's friends have also felt the sting of her loss over the last 11 years.
One of those friends who met Holly when the two went to school together years ago is Rebecca Riggs.
Rebecca sat down for a Zoom interview with the Taken Too Soon team to talk about Holly, their friendship, and the turmoil she continues to endure from Holly's murder remaining unsolved. Rebecca, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Oh, thank you guys for having me.
Now, Rebecca, you were one of Holly's friends, is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
When did you first meet Holly?
I first met Holly, I would say elementary school. We were all just like a little group of girls, we hung out and stuff together. But when I first met Holly, I needed a pencil. I'll never forget it. And, she was just like that person that was just a giver. So she saw me struggling, looking for something. And she was just like, hey, do you need a pencil? I have an extra one. And I'll never forget that because it just made me feel, like somebody actually cared at that moment because I was pretty new to the school system. So whenever she gave me the pencil, it was just like immediate friends, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just that connection. Yeah. And she had an amazing smile. So I always said that if you were having the worst day, if Holly walked in, it would just bring you back to life. She was just genuinely beautiful spirit, beautiful soul.
What would y'all do together?
Just about everything. Giggle, laugh, talk about boys, just stuff that you do in grade school, that's when it started. We went all the way through school together. So whenever it did start, even in gym class, like we would play ball together, probably some of the things that they don't play anymore, like Foursquare, stuff like that. She was very athletic. She had a long hair, like her hair was longer than mine. And I used to think, like whenever she would put it up, like I know that all that hair is just, it's hot and stuff like that, but she never let it get to her. She was always just a go-getter, always. So.
And what was it about Holly that kept you guys remaining as friends throughout your school?
Oh, like I said, she was definitely a giver. One of the other things was just her smile, anything and everything. It didn't matter what was going on, it was always just her smile. I mean, like, and I know that you've seen pictures, but pictures don't do it justice when you're in front of her. So when you're in front of somebody that has such a personality, that's bubbly, that's smiling, that can bring you back to your center. So you could be completely upset, and Holly would say something, and you totally forget what you were upset about. So yeah, it helped me. Being her friend was, and we hugged each other. They don't really do that today, which I think is sad, because when you start going through the different changes of elementary school into middle school into high school, you need someone that you can depend on. And she was one of my girls. She was one of my best friends. I could depend on her.
Did y'all keep in touch after grade school and high school?
We did, for a little while. We did until I moved.
Gotcha. When was that?
I moved in October of 2006. So, just like seeing her out. She was a hard worker. So she pretty much gave a lot of her life to her job. But whenever you did see her, it was just like being in school again, just laughing and trying to figure out like what's going on in your life. And but I would say high school was probably one of my favorite times that I had in my life. We would all just, gossip, talk, brush each other's hair. We would do things like that. Share makeup when we weren't supposed to be wearing any.
And do you have one memory in particular of something that you and Holly did together that you still kind of think about to this day?
Yeah, actually I do. So my upbringing was strict. And I remember whenever I was talking to her about, my upbringing, which was strict, which, I mean, I don't fault my parents for anything because they kept us safe. They raised us how they thought was, the best. And it actually turned out to be pretty good. So, but at the time I was devastated because I couldn't go and do the things that the other girls were doing. And I remember her telling me that it was okay, that she didn't really go out and do those things either. So it was kind of like a moment of, you feel left out. You feel like you're being left out of something important. But Holly was the kind of person that just told you straight. She was genuine. And when she saw me crying about something that I really can't remember, I think it was like I was supposed to go to the mall or somewhere, and I didn't get to do it. And she told me, she's like, that's just something small. Like you're gonna do good things. You're gonna do all kinds of things. And she would always say stuff like that. So it would be like, don't worry about it because you're a beautiful person and you're going to get to live a great life and see all kinds of things and do all kinds of things. And it resonates with me now because I have done so many things, so many great things. I've been to all kinds of concerts. And it's just like, I was thinking about it the other day. Um, she loved all kinds of music, and it wasn't just one genre. She loved all kinds. I was the same way. So we could talk about different things like different types of music and stuff. And she, again, she told me, because I wanted to go to a concert at one point, and she was like, "It's okay. Like, you'll get to go to concert. You'll get to go to one." And I didn't get to go to one until I was later on in life. Like, my first concert was literally Pink Floyd. It was Roger Waters, but it was the most amazing concert. She was right. And I look back on that.
So this might be a little difficult, but how did you find out about what happened to Holly?
A friend of mine had told me, and I didn't believe her. I just couldn't believe it. I just thought to myself, like, out of all the people, not her. No, there's no way. So then I actually reached out, to her mom on Facebook and found out that it was true. And I was devastated because here I'd been doing, like all these different things in Kentucky, and I was away from here, and I couldn't hug her mother. It made me think, how short life really is. I started to do different things and living my life a little differently. It's hard to hear that one of you has been done so horrible. It was just horrible. And I was devastated. How do you take that? I couldn't imagine someone coming up to me and telling me that my child was murdered. I couldn't do it. Like, I don't know how I would take it.
And were you close with Wilma, her mom?
Not particularly, because my, like with strict growing up, you couldn't really go anywhere much. But after reaching out to her mom, I just, as a mom myself, I just felt it. I felt her pain. It was immense. It was just like, it was devastation. It was horrible. And to know that it's been 11 years and there's still no answers, it's really hard for me, because that smile that would bring everything back to center hasn't been here for 11 years.
How did Holly's death change the way that you live your life?
At first, I was cautious of everything, but then I wanted to see things and I wanted to live. I really wanted to live. I wanted to do the things that she said that I would do. So I've been doing it. Every year, I try to make it a point to be present around my family and my friends. And even if I have to, drive 7 hours from Kentucky, I still come here and I still try to be in every one of them's lives. I still reach out to them on Facebook. And I mean, I've got friends that I've been friends with as long as Holly. We're in our 40s and we're still friends.
So when you make these trips back to LJ, did the memories with Holly start flooding back?
Oh yeah, they really do. It makes you think about, like being in school and sitting beside her and just, like looking at her face. It's still there. I still see it like it was yesterday, you know, us sitting beside each other, because she actually sat beside me in school and we shared all kinds of different things, candy. And the most memories that I'll ever have is in Gilmer High School with my friends. They were amazing. And Holly was part of that. We were a team. We were a pack.
Were you still close with Holly when she became a mother?
A little bit when her first one came.
What did you see in Holly when she gave birth to her first little boy?
Oh man, Mama Bear, straight up. She was a Mama Bear. She was very protective, but oh man, that was her world. She fought very hard for her. I mean, like for your children, and for Holly, it was a little different because I remember when we were kids, she really didn't want to go down that path of being a mom and stuff like that. She wanted to live, and travel and do all kinds of things. And when she became a mom, it was just like she was meant to be a mom. Totally meant to be a mom. Best mom.
Let me ask you, it's been 11 years.
Yeah.
You agreed to come on and talk about Holly with us and kind of what would you hope comes out of this? Is it justice for the family? Is it like some kind of understanding of why?
All the above. All the above. I want to know why. I want to know why you would take that sunshine out of those children's lives. Because, she was like her whole face, and I just want to know why and what would be your motive to do something like that to somebody that was so amazing. And we need justice. I want justice. I believe still to this day there will be. I have that hope. I pray for her family and I pray for her children. Because they robbed those children of a great mother. All those memories. They robbed her mother of mom and daughter dates. There's all kinds of things that they just, like they robbed us from meeting up and when we're older and having time, in our golden years. I'm almost there, but we were robbed of it. And she definitely deserves justice. She deserves to be at peace.
From what you know about the case, what theory has come to mind for you?
I know that she was murdered, and that they really and truly don't have that many suspects. They haven't really, said this one or that one. For me, I was thinking, it was like somebody she had to have known them. I feel like she just, she went with them. I think it's somebody that she knew. Maybe even if it wasn't just for long term, maybe it was short term, that she had knew him. But she was that kind of person where she would open up, and she opened up to everyone. She was a giver. She was someone that loved, and she was. And I hate to say this, I really do, but she was an easy target, definitely. And they took advantage of that.
So you feel like Holly was empathetic to other people and their
Yes.
situations almost to a fault where it could have put her in danger.
Yes, I do. I really do. And that's sad, It really is, because it makes you kind of leery yourself about helping people, and because she was that person. But I don't think I'd want her any other way. It was just her.
And I guess we'll end with this. If there was one thing you could say to someone who may be out there that may know something, or that maybe even not knowingly has that piece of information, what would you stress to them in order to find that justice for Holly and hopefully get this case solved?
Please, for your own soul, if you know something, don't carry that. For someone that was so genuine and sweet and beautiful from the inside out, she deserves the justice. Her family deserves it. I just beg you, if you know something, don't take that with you when you go. Let it be known. Tell somebody to bring this to a close so that we can have closure and so that she can have peace. Because that's what she deserves so much more. I just beg, please, if you know something, even if it's just a tidbit of information that could lead us down to the right place, just please, for her family, for her friends, for all of us that love her, I beg you, please just tell us. Let her soul be at rest.
Holly Fox Strickland was 32 years old. Her life was taken with a single gunshot. Someone out there knows more than what they've said. Maybe you do.
If you have any information about the murder of Holly Fox Strickland, we urge you to contact law enforcement or email podcastadmin@gainesvilletimes.com. That's podcastadmin@gainesvilletimes.com, or submit an anonymous tip.
This podcast was produced by Faith Montgomery.
Special thanks to Dr. Jon Hager for sharing his expertise.
In our next episode, we'll talk to the private investigators who worked on Holly's case and give their insights into what they've uncovered.
If you like the Taken Too Soon podcast, be sure to give us a rating wherever you listen.
The music in this podcast was by Ben Ingram.
You've been listening to Taken Too Soon, a podcast by The Times.